We need to provide protections for those that are caring. We need to provide protections for those that are being cared for. And we need to make sure that we're not just meeting the base level of the pyramid, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to emotional needs and mental health needs, we know that isolation caused huge issues during the pandemic, not just among people in long-term care facilities, but even in the general populace. 1 in 5 people ended up with mental health issues coming out of the pandemic. The suicide rate was up immensely, and violence actually was up immensely. 32% for the people in this age demographic of long-term care, and of course we've seen a huge rise in crime across the country, 39% increase. So addressing all of the levels of people's well-being will be important, and this bill doesn't go that far. I would argue that people need in future to learn the lessons that we learned out of the pandemic. It didn't really help when we kept some individuals away from seeing their loved ones and let others in, because at the end of the day, we let 90% of the people do what they wanted, and the 10% that were unvaccinated could not, but the science showed both could transmit COVID. And so at the end of the day, the reasonable accommodations of masking and personal protective equipment would have really, I think, addressed a lot of the loneliness, the agony of watching loved ones die or not being able to get to loved ones that were dying. I think that was very serious. The other thing I would say, Mr. Speaker, is that, you know, the long-term care facilities have been studied and studied and studied. There was a report at Health Committee in 2018 when I was there that talked about standards of care and talked about the number of individuals that you need to have per resident, and that it's not always the same by resident. It matters whether or not the resident has dementia, whether the resident is at a high functioning level or not. And so certainly I think we need to look at the best practices in the country and adopt some kind of minimum standards of care in terms of number of caregivers, standards of care in terms of times. You hear a lot about how many minutes somebody will get of care a day. Clearly, you know, for human beings, we can't just say, well, you know, you've had your 7 minutes for the day, that's it, that's all. I think we need to be more compassionate than that, Mr. Speaker. So while I'm happy to see this bill, I think it's a great first step, I would like to see us go further. I think the government has an opportunity as they reflect on what happened in the pandemic, the violation of people's rights and freedoms, not just those in long-term care facility, but 7 million Canadians that were prevented from leaving their country for 3 years. I think there's a huge opportunity to do a thorough review and to come back with policies that will address people's basic needs and their mental health needs and the emotional supports that they need. Obviously, it's one step at a time, Mr. Speaker, but I'm happy to say that we will support this legislation, and we look forward to doing more things to protect our seniors who are the most vulnerable in society. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.